And this is me doing a handstand on the Great Wall of China. Sienna practically squealed, flipping to the next photo on our parents' 70-inch flat screen. Her voice bounced off the vaulted ceilings of the living room like a champagne cork that refused to settle. I watched her from the corner of the couch, my coffee cooling in my hands, my smile locked tight behind clenched teeth. The slideshow had been going on for nearly 3 hours. Tokyo street food, sunsets in Santorini, riding camels in the Sahara while wearing coordinated linen outfits. That's Morocco, Mom. You remember how I told you the guide said I looked like a young Audrey Hepburn? She asked, fluttering her lashes at no one in particular. Mom laughed like it was the cleverest thing she'd heard all year. Dad nodded approvingly, cradling a wine glass as if it were some sacred relic. They had no idea what it cost me to sit through this. No clue what I had to give up while Sienna found herself for $50,000. She had just turned 21. I was 23, 2 years older and several lifetimes wearier. While Sienna flitted through Paris and Positano, I worked 3 jobs, barista at 6 a.m., tutoring pre-med undergrads from 2 to 5 o'clock, and night shifts in the hospital research lab until nearly midnight. I hadn't been on a plane in 6 years. I hadn't had more than $50 in my account since sophomore year. And yet here I was, the invisible daughter in the corner, watching the golden child be worshipped, like she discovered a cure for cancer instead of taking selfies next to it. This one, she said, pausing on a perfectly lit photo of her holding a glass of rose against the backdrop of a vineyard in Provence. This is where I realized I wanted to be a lifestyle influencer. I already have 10,000 followers. Some skincare brand just DM'd me about a possible collab. Dad's eyes lit up. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Much better than being cooped up in a lab all day. He looked at me as he said it, deliberately. The sting of it didn't land immediately. It burned slow like acid. I opened my mouth to say something, I don't know what, but Mom cut in fast. Let's not start, Olivia. This is Sienna's night. Their message had been clear when I begged for help with tuition last year. We're not made of money, Olivia. 2 weeks later, they bought Sienna a first-class ticket to Tokyo for soul expansion. I was thinking, Sienna continued, flicking her professionally curled hair over one shoulder, maybe I could convert the guest house into a content creation studio? You know, for my brand. I blinked. Once. Twice. She meant the guest house, the one behind the garden that I'd quietly turned into a makeshift lab, patching together secondhand microscopes and borrowed PCR kits. The one place where I felt like I had a future, even if no one else cared. My laugh came out too sharp. Everyone turned. Something funny? Sienna asked, tilting her head like a confused Barbie doll. No, I said, rising to my feet, just thinking about how interesting timing can be. I walked out to the porch before they could ask anything else. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone. I'd been refreshing the same inbox for the past 2 days, waiting, hoping, and there it was. Subject line: Manuscript accepted. Horizon Pharmaceuticals proposal attached. I read it 3 times before the words settled into my chest like stone. Dear Ms. Chin, we are pleased to inform you that your research paper, Novel Approaches to Enzymatic Catalysis in Pharmaceutical Development, has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Biochemical Innovation. Furthermore, based on your groundbreaking results, Horizon Pharmaceuticals would like to offer a formal collaboration opportunity. Details enclosed. My breath caught. The screen blurred as my eyes flooded. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Olivia. Mom's voice sliced through the moment. Come back in. Sienna's not finished. I slipped the phone into my pocket. Back inside, Sienna was raving about a vineyard owner in France who had basically offered her a job because she had a sophisticated palate. He said I could totally handle their social media, she giggled, winking at Dad. That's because you have natural talent, Mom cooed. Not everyone needs a degree to be successful. That one hit harder than the rest. I sank into the armchair again, and let their voices wash over me like static. They had no idea. No idea about the nights I stayed awake in that freezing guest house, running test after test. No idea that I'd written the entire research paper between cappuccino orders and midnight blood sample processing. They were too busy marveling at how brave Sienna was for backpacking through Europe. Wait, she clapped. I almost forgot. Remember that little lab in the guest house? The one Olivia used to play scientist in? I think it would make the perfect spot for my photography setup. That was it. My hands moved before I could stop them. I actually have some photos to share too, I said, reaching for my laptop. Sienna rolled her eyes. Let me guess, test tubes and petri dishes. Boring. I plugged in the HDMI cable. The first slide lit up the screen with a complex enzymatic diagram that only one person in the room truly understood. Dad. He leaned forward and didn't lean back. This, I said, my voice calm but vibrating under the surface, is what I've been working on, while handling 3 jobs, while living off instant noodles, while you were too busy funding Sienna's spiritual awakening to help with my tuition. Next slide. Early data from my breakthrough. Slide 3. Synthesis results, purity percentages, cost efficiency analysis. Slide 4. Horizons offer, lead researcher. Starting salary, $150,000. Patent included. Royalties structured. The room went dead silent. I looked at my father. He wasn't smirking anymore. Sienna's smile cracked. No way, Sienna stammered, blinking at the screen like it was glitching. This can't be real. It's very real, I replied, clicking to the next slide. The projected image showed a scanned copy of Horizon's formal offer letter, signed by their head of research. The room was so quiet I could hear the baseboard heater kick in across the hallway. They're fast-tracking the patent. I'll be leading a new research unit effective next month, all based on the work I did in the guest house. The same guest house she had just declared her future content studio. Dad shifted in his seat, leaning forward, squinting at the molecular diagrams and procedural results like he'd just recognized a forgotten part of himself. He'd been a chemistry teacher before trading lab coats for khakis and corporate handbooks. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, and neither did Mom. But Sienna, she sputtered, that's not fair. I mean, you can't just drop this on us like a mic drop moment. I'm the one who's supposed to be, what? I turned to her slowly. The successful one? The one they're proud of? The one they gave everything to while telling me they had nothing left? Sienna opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Just a flush of color crawling up her neck, like embarrassment catching fire. Olivia! Mom finally broke the silence, her voice soft and brittle. We didn't know, you never said. I raised my hand gently, stopping her. I did say, you just didn't hear me. Or maybe you did, and chose to pretend I was fine. Because I've always been the one who could figure it out, right? The hurt in my chest didn't come from the lack of money. It came from the lack of belief. I closed the laptop with a quiet snap, stood up, and began collecting my things. Anyway, I just wanted to share. Figured it was my turn to do a little slideshow. Wait, Sienna called after me, panic creeping into her voice. What about the guest house? You can't just claim it like it's yours. I paused, pulling out my phone. Actually, I can. I tapped the screen and handed the phone to Dad. 6 months ago, you signed over the deed when you thought I was just playing around with lab kits and pipettes. He squinted at the document, then his eyes widened. You said, and I quote, let her have her little hobby space, since we can't help with tuition. The color drained from his face like a glass of wine knocked over on white carpet. He remembered. Mom looked at him, then back at me. You can't seriously intend to keep her from using it. It's still part of the family home. No, I said simply. It's my lab, where I made the discovery that will fund my own world tour someday. And no, Sienna, Your ring light and yoga mat will not be part of that plan." She stared at me as if I'd slapped her. "You're ruining everything." "I'm setting boundaries," I corrected. "There's a difference." I reached for my coat and bag, slinging it over my shoulder with a quiet resolve. "And Mom, Dad, you might want to start saving up for your own retirement. Something tells me Sienna's brand isn't going to cover it." As I stepped out the door, I didn't slam it, didn't yell, didn't break down. I just left, calm, focused, finally free. Behind me, I could hear Sienna's voice rise, demanding explanations, whining about betrayal. I heard Mom rush after her, trying to soothe things, and Dad's footsteps pacing nervously near the kitchen. But none of it stuck to me anymore. For the first time, their drama stayed behind the threshold, and I didn't carry it out with me. Outside, the air was cold but clean. I stood under the porch light for a moment, watching my breath fog in the darkness, and let myself feel it, really feel it. Relief, vindication, a quiet, powerful joy. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Horizon Pharmaceuticals. Contract attached. Signature line ready. I didn't hesitate. Tapping the screen, I opened the digital document, scrolled to the bottom, and signed my name. Dr. Olivia Chin. Then I stared at it a moment longer, just to let it sink in. They had no idea. All those nights, they ignored me. All those years, they underestimated me. All those comments about how practical I was, how low maintenance I seemed. And now, I was the one with the patent, the salary, the future. I walked down the steps slowly, like someone leaving a courtroom with a verdict already in their favor. And in a way I had, just without the jury, just without anyone clapping. But who needed applause when you finally realized your worth? The next morning, I woke up to 16 missed calls and 3 text messages from family members I hadn't spoken to in years, all from Sienna's Instagram post. She had wasted no time spinning the narrative, a tearful selfie in our parents' kitchen, captioned, "Some people forget where they came from. Families should support dreams, not compete with them." By lunchtime, it had over 1,200 likes and a stream of comments sympathizing with her. "You deserve better, babe. Jealous siblings are the worst. She probably never supported your career anyway." It almost made me laugh. Almost. I didn't post a rebuttal. I didn't even comment. I didn't need to. Because that afternoon, the Seattle Weekly published a feature titled, "Local Scientist Makes Breakthrough in Drug Development." The article detailed my research, how I'd worked 3 jobs to fund my education after my family declined to help, and how I'd made the discovery that could alter enzymatic drug manufacturing. They even quoted my undergrad chemistry professor, who called me one of the most determined minds I've encountered in 20 years of teaching. It didn't take long for Sienna's followers to start Googling. By nightfall, her comment section had shifted. "Wait, is this about your sister Olivia? Just saw an article about her research. Your sister's literally curing diseases, and you're mad she won't let you take selfies in her lab." Her next post was more subtle, a black and white video with soft piano music. Her voice trembled as she whispered about toxic family dynamics and how fame shouldn't cost compassion. The comments section rallied again, but it was thinner this time. That evening, as I was reviewing some notes for Horizon's legal team, I heard a knock on the lab door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find Mom. Her heels clicked uncertainly against the concrete floor as she stepped in, clutching a leather purse that probably cost more than my first car. "Olivia," she said softly, "we need to talk about this situation." I didn't look up from my notes. Which situation? The one where I worked 3 jobs while you paid for Sienna's month-long massage retreat in Bali? Or the one where she's now telling the internet I'm sabotaging her influencer career? She winced, and for a moment I saw something break in her face. "You know, we would have helped if we could. Things were just complicated." "No," I said, finally meeting her eyes. "You could. You just chose not to. There's a difference." She stood there, blinking, like she hadn't expected me to be that direct. We didn't think you needed help. You've always been so capable. The word hit me like a backhand compliment. Capable doesn't mean invulnerable, I said, and it definitely doesn't mean expendable. Mom's hand trembled slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Your father and we've been talking. We'd like to help now. Maybe with your research. Or investing in the next phase. I couldn't stop the laugh that slipped out. Now that there's money and press involved, right? Now that I've proven I'm not just playing scientist. That's not fair, she said, lowering her voice. No, I said, stepping around the lab bench. What's not fair is having to explain why my sister gets praised for posting beach photos while I'm hauling centrifuge parts from a thrift auction. Mom's gaze shifted to the equipment around us, the beakers, the data pinned to the cork board, the scent of ethanol still lingering in the air. For the first time, I think she actually saw it. Not just the mess of it, but the meaning, the labor, the loneliness. We didn't mean to show me exactly where I stand in this family. I asked gently but firmly, to make it clear that Sienna's filters and hashtags were worth more than my future. She didn't answer. My phone buzzed. Horizon. I glanced at the notification. Contract review call in 5 minutes. I have a meeting, I said, walking back to the desk. You can let yourself out. She didn't move right away, just hovered, waiting for some crack in my voice, some opening to pour herself back in. But there was none. She turned eventually. Her heels echoed hollowly as she walked away. The lab door clicked softly shut behind her. The call with Horizon was quick and efficient. They were ready to file the patent and announce the partnership publicly within the week. I was now officially the lead researcher on a project that would change the field. After the call, I sat in silence for a few seconds, staring at the blinking cursor on my screen. A message from Dad came through next. Your mother's upset. We need to discuss this as a family. I stared at the words. No greeting, no apology, just an assumption that I'd still want to be part of the very thing that ignored me for years. I typed back, nothing to discuss. Contract signing tomorrow at 10 a.m. Then I put my phone on silent. No more clarifications. No more justifications. I was done explaining myself to people who never asked the right questions. That night, the city lights shimmered outside my tiny guest house lab as I cleaned up the bench. I passed by the shelf where I'd once kept my childhood science kits and paused for a moment, brushing dust off an old notebook labeled Project Super DNA. I smiled, not out of nostalgia, but because I finally understood something. I never needed them to believe in me. I just needed them to see what they missed while they were looking the other way. 3 months into my position at Horizon Pharmaceuticals, I barely recognized my life. My mornings started with briefings from senior scientists. My evenings ended reviewing research proposals that referenced my work as a benchmark. I had an office with glass walls and a nameplate that read, Lead Researcher, Dr. Olivia Chin. And I had silence, beautiful, uninterrupted silence, until one day during my lunch break, I got a call from my aunt. She's falling apart, she said without preamble. Who? I asked, even though I already knew. Sienna, she sighed. Some of her sponsors pulled out. Apparently someone found out your parents funded her world tour. Her image is not what it seemed. Of course it wasn't. She'd spent years painting herself as self-made while living off other people's sacrifices. Her response? Another video, titled, The Truth About Toxic Family and the Price of Success. It featured her crying softly in a candlelit room, clutching a journal like it was her rosary. My sister's jealousy, she whispered, has turned my own followers against me. I watched the whole thing while stirring my yogurt, not out of anger, not even out of pity, out of something stranger, closure. Later that day, my lab assistant popped her head into my office. Your dad's here. I looked up, surprised. Send him in. He entered slowly, clutching his old leather briefcase like it might shield him from what he'd come to say. His blazer was outdated, and the worry on his face aged him more than time ever could. "She's devastated," he began, skipping pleasantries. "She's lost 3 sponsorship deals this week." I stayed seated, calm, focused, and this involves me how. "She thinks you're behind it, that you're trying to ruin her." "I haven't lifted a finger against her," I said, returning to my notes. "Her followers just found the truth. Isn't that what she always said influencers are about? Authenticity." Dad looked down, shamed. "She's talking about moving back home. Your mother's worried about her mental health." My eyes stayed on the paper. "Like you were worried about mine when I was working 3 jobs and crying in the guest house at 3 a.m. while running enzyme simulations." He didn't answer. Silence thickened until he finally said, "We made mistakes." I met his eyes. "You were always the stronger one," he added. "We thought you didn't need us." "Being strong doesn't mean being ignored," I replied. "And being independent doesn't mean being invisible." He sat down heavily across from me. "I wish we'd seen this sooner." "Wishes don't change the past," I said, softer than I expected. "Actions do." Right then, my phone buzzed. An alert from Horizon's media department. "National coverage confirmed. Olivia Chen to lead keynote at International Biochemical Summit in Paris." I stood. "I have work to do, Dad." He didn't argue, just looked at me with something that might have been pride, or maybe regret, wrapped in it. "You've built something remarkable, Olivia," he said. "I just wish," but I didn't let him finish. That evening, Horizon's homepage displayed a headline, "Breakthrough in Drug Development. Seattle Scientist Leads the Future of Biochemistry." My face was there, no filters, no edits. Just me in my lab coat, smiling like someone who'd finally earned the right to take up space. The next morning, another visitor arrived. Mom. She looked different, less polished, her makeup softer, clothes simpler, and in her hands she held an envelope. "We're selling the beach house," she said, barely above a whisper. I froze. The beach house was their dream, their excuse, the reason they couldn't help with my tuition. "Why?" I asked. "Because Sienna needs to start over," she said. "And this time, we're not just handing her a check. She's enrolling at Cascadia Community College next semester. She's going to have to earn her path." I sat down slowly, not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. "Not really. I wanted you to know," Mom continued, her voice cracking, "because you were right about all of it, and because I'm proud of you, not just for the research, for how you carried yourself, even when we failed to carry you." The words didn't bring tears. They didn't undo the past, but they did settle somewhere deep, like stones placed gently over old wounds. Markers of a battle survived. "It's not about being strong enough to stand alone," I said. "It's about standing up for yourself even when the people who should be behind you aren't." Mom nodded, eyes wet. As she left, she paused. "Sienna wants to be a wellness coach now." I laughed, and this time it didn't taste bitter. "Maybe she'll finally find herself." "Maybe," Mom whispered. That night, I sat alone in my lab, watching the centrifuge hum. I pulled out my old notes, scraps from the nights I thought I was wasting my life while my sister was living hers. Turns out, I was building something real, and the people who once overlooked me now had no choice but to look again. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the Grand Palais in Paris, presenting my latest research on enzyme sequencing to a room filled with the brightest minds in pharmaceutical innovation. No champagne in hand, no selfie stick, just data, real, hard-earned data. The irony didn't escape me. I was staying in the exact same hotel Sienna had flaunted on her Instagram, the one with the rooftop infinity pool and floor-to-ceiling windows where she once posed in silk robes, captioning it "A Girl Can Dream." Only this time the dream was mine, not curated, not filtered, built from scratch. The applause that followed my final slide was polite at first, then surged into something that startled me. Respect. True, professional, peer-level respect. I stepped down from the stage with a steady breath, my heart not pounding from nerves, but from arrival. My phone buzzed. A message from Mom. It was a photo. Emma, sitting at the kitchen table back in Seattle, surrounded by textbooks and highlighters, scribbling into a spiral notebook. She's really trying, the caption read. Thank you for showing her it's possible. It was followed by a second message. Dad, you would have made your mother proud. I'm sorry I didn't say that sooner. I stared at the words a long time. They didn't erase the past, but maybe they shaped the future. I stepped out onto the balcony of my suite, the Paris skyline glowing like molten glass under the fading sun. Somewhere in my suitcase was an old travel journal, the one Sienna had dropped off at my lab 2 weeks ago with a quiet, almost embarrassed smile. I thought you might want to see the difference, she'd said. Inside were her old Instagram captions, printed and pasted next to perfectly lit images. 5-star hotel lobbies, lavender fields, plated desserts she'd barely tasted. But in the margins, she'd written something new. Handwritten, raw, honest. Afraid of being ordinary. Didn't realize extraordinary takes work. Olivia was actually studying while I took this picture. She was building her future, while I was pretending to have one. I flipped through page after page of realness, stitched into artifice. Sienna, in her own way, was finally facing herself. My phone buzzed again, this time a video call. I answered. Mom, Dad, and Sienna were all huddled around the kitchen island. Her textbooks were still open. A half-eaten grilled cheese sat next to a chemistry worksheet. Well, Dad asked. It went well, I said simply. The research is gaining traction. We might have something ready for clinical trials next year. We watched the live stream, Sienna said quietly. I actually understood some of it this time. The part about catalytic bonding and substrate distortion? I read about that last week. There was a pause. Not awkward, just real. And in that pause, something shifted. Not forgiveness, but recognition. Of work. Of change. Of intention. My next project, I said, uses some of the same basics. I could walk you through it when I get back, if you want. Her eyes lit up, not performative, not content-ready. Genuine. I'd like that. Mom wiped at the corner of her eye. Dad cleared his throat too hard. Some things hadn't changed. We were still terrible with emotion. But other things had changed profoundly. The beach house had been sold. The proceeds didn't fund another journey to self-discovery. They paid for Sienna's first full year at Cascadia Community College. My parents had downsized to a smaller house, no longer trying to impress neighbors they didn't even like. And I had expanded my lab at Horizon. Hired a full-time team, was mentoring 2 young women in STEM who reminded me painfully of myself at 20, not because of their brilliance, but because of how often they were underestimated. I ended the call, sat quietly on the balcony, and pulled out the journal one more time. On the final page, next to a photo of Sienna faking a study session in a Paris cafe, was one last scribbled note. She was building her legacy. I was borrowing mine. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever need. That night, as I packed for my flight home, my phone buzzed one more time. A private message from Sienna. Aced my chemistry quiz today. Turns out I'm not as bad at science as I thought. Maybe it runs in the family. I smiled, then typed back. Maybe it's not about what runs in the family. Maybe it's about what you're willing to fight for. Her reply came fast. I'm learning that. I set the phone down and reached for my research binder. Tomorrow would bring new experiments, new challenges, new deadlines. But tonight, I let myself feel the full circle of it all. We had taken different roads. One paved with struggle, the other with sugar. One climbed alone, the other floated. But eventually, both of us landed in the real world. And sometimes, that's where the best journeys finally begin. The flight back from Paris was long, but I didn't mind. I spent most of it reviewing data and making notes in the margins of my lab binder. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because I finally could. When I landed in Seattle, the air felt different. Not just colder, but clearer, like something had lifted. Waiting at the curb was a familiar face, Mom, bundled in a jacket too thin for the wind, holding a paper cup of coffee with both hands. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me the cup, then hugged me in a way she hadn't since I was a teenager. Awkward and tentative, like she didn't know if she still had permission. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, "for who you've become, for how you got there." I nodded, not needing more, because now I didn't need anything from them. That weekend, I visited the old guest house. My lab, my sanctuary. It had changed a little, new equipment, a better fridge for the samples, a ceiling fan that actually worked. But the heart of it was still the same, a place I built when no one else believed in what I was capable of. Sienna stopped by the next day. She knocked, didn't assume she could just walk in. A good sign. "I brought something," she said, holding up a Tupperware container. "Dad's famous dumplings. He made them. I just microwaved." We sat under the eaves outside the lab, eating quietly, the silence not heavy like before, just peaceful. "I'm still figuring it out," she said after a while. "School is harder than I thought, but it's good. I actually like learning, and I think I like earning things more than I expected." I smiled. Earning things has a way of making you appreciate them differently. She glanced down. "You were always the smart one. I just didn't want to see it." "You weren't supposed to see it," I said gently. "You were supposed to see you. That's the part that took longer." She looked at me then, not as an obstacle, not as a shadow, but as a sister, a real one. Before she left, she hesitated in the doorway. "Do you think we'll ever be normal again?" I shook my head. "No," I said, "but we might be better." She nodded, satisfied with the honesty. That evening, I got a call from one of the directors at Horizon. "We're nominating your project for the National Research Impact Award," he said. "Just wanted you to be the first to know." I thanked him, then sat there for a long time in the lab, the walls aglow with soft overhead light, paper spread around me like pieces of something finally whole. Sometimes I still thought about those early nights, the ones with burned coffee and sleepless worry, hands shaking over pipettes while the rest of the world ignored me. But those nights were mine. No one could take them away. No one could rewrite them into a vacation or a filtered photo op. They were proof. Proof that I hadn't been born into privilege, but I had carved something out of neglect, something solid, something mine. Weeks later, I found a note taped to my front door, in Sienna's handwriting. "Passed my final. Enrolled full-time next semester. Thanks for being the person I needed to become who I want to be." I stood there a long time after reading it, the wind tugging at my sleeves, the city alive in the background. And I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about arrival, about building something so radiant that the people who once doubted you, once dismissed you, can no longer look away. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because they finally see your light, and it blinds them. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about rising so far above the people who doubted you that they have no choice but to look up and wonder how they ever missed your light. Dr. Olivia Chin.